Apenas nos pusimos en dos pies y nos vimos en la sombra de la hoguera. Escuchamos la voz del desafío, siempre miramos el río, pensando en la otra.
Before I begin, I would like to honor someone who is not here. Our friend, colleague, and traveling companion, Teddy Mowry, would have loved this moment and would probably have been sitting in the front row staring down at me with a smile. Unfortunately, Teddy passed away several weeks after we got back from the trip to El Paso. So part of this service is in honor of his memory. The irony was not lost on me that the first full day we spent on our Borderlands trip to El Paso was Epiphany Sunday. Christians celebrate the Feast of Epiphany as the day when the Magi, the three kings, arrive in Bethlehem after traveling from far-off lands to celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus. We were 11 seminary students who had traveled from a far-off land called Fort Worth. We had not come to celebrate, but rather to learn and to understand. We wanted to understand what the realities of life in a community along the US-Mexico border was really like. When we arrived in El Paso the night before, we did what most seminarians do when they get together in a large group. We went to a restaurant and stuffed our faces. We who are in positions of privilege often take for granted the easy access that we have to food. We show up to coffee hour at church or to gatherings of friends and family, and we expect there to be a table with an assortment of food. We expect the food to have a variety of different options, to cater to a myriad of different dietary and allergy restrictions, and we reserve the right to allow the food to simply sit there and go to waste, and not eat it if we choose. This was true of our trip to El Paso. All of our food, travel, and accommodation were paid for by a generous grant that had been given to Brite Divinity School. We did not have to worry where our meals were coming from. We did not have to worry if we could afford having an appetizer or a dessert with our meal. We did not have to worry if we were ordering the most expensive thing on the menu. We simply had to order whatever we wanted and expect to be served. We had dinner that evening with Dr. Iracema Coronado, a professor of political science at the University of Texas at El Paso. She brought with her a rosca de reyes as a gift to go along with our dinner. A rosca is an oval-shaped cake, similar to the king cake that you get during Mardi Gras, to celebrate Epiphany in Mexican and Latinx American communities. Traditionally, there is a small figure of a baby hidden somewhere inside the rosca, and whoever finds the baby is responsible for hosting a party with tamales and atole afterwards that those in attendance have the privilege of going to afterwards. We all had a piece of the rosca. Some of us had a second piece. But there was no baby inside. I'm not sure if this was accidental or intentional on the part of the bakery where Dr. Coronado picked up the rosca, but it became an interesting and auspicious sign for the rest of the trip that was not lost on me as the journey began. The next morning, we did the other thing that seminarians usually do when they get together in a large group. We went to church. We were guests at the 12 p.m. Mass at St. Mark's Catholic Church on the east side of El Paso, where we met priest and community activist Father Arturo Bañuelas. The Mass was very festive and very celebratory, with lots of singing and hand clapping. It was also completely in Spanish. As one of the few members of the group who is fluent in Spanish, I was able to follow along with the service and with Father Arturo's homily. He spoke of how Epiphany was about the journey of coming to find what you had been searching for, finding transformation in that, and taking that back with you to where you came from and be changed, or to do exactly as the Magi did, to decide not to return from whence you came and go in a different direction. In a sense, it was the story of why we had all decided to come on the trip to El Paso. We wanted to be transformed by what we would see and go back to our churches and communities of faith in order to have real conversations about immigration and border justice that could somehow make a difference. After having lunch and visiting with Father Arturo for a while, we went to Centro San Juan Diego, one of the shelters that were receiving immigrants that had recently been released from intake and processing by ICE. Dr. Coronado told us that these people were not from Mexico, but other countries in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. They had spent nearly 2 weeks on a bus and had entered the country through legal ports of entry and had directly approached ICE officials requesting political asylum in the US. After having been detained by ICE for nearly 2 to 3 days, they were released to shelters like Centro San Juan Diego and Annunciation House. These shelters gave them a chance to have a shower and a warm meal, clean clothes, and a safe place to lay their head as shelter officials attempted to contact friends and family in the US to reunite them while they awaited their impending court date for the asylum cases. We came intending to visit with them and listen to their stories, but we had arrived right at mealtime, and Father Arturo put us to work serving food to those in the shelter. There is an intensely intimate connection to sharing food with another individual. By serving food to another person, it forces you to look into the face of the other and to affirm and acknowledge their identity and their humanity. It forces you to truly see the other person across from you, and they no longer become nameless or faceless. They become a real person who has a story and a set of lived experiences. We not only served these immigrants food, we sat with them. We learned their names and heard their stories of how they had left because they could not find work and because they feared for the safety of themselves and their families from gang violence in their home countries. We listened to their dreams and aspirations and how they were willing to go through whatever it took to provide a better life for their families, many of whom were still back at home until they could earn enough money to help bring them over, most likely in the same way that they came over. They were not just immigrants. They were people with whom we had formed a relationship. As we left Centro San Juan Diego, feeling like we had been transformed in the spirit of Epiphany, Dr. Coronado nonchalantly mentioned as we got back into the van to go to the hotel, you know, the sad thing is that most of these people, when they show up for their asylum cases, are most likely going to have their cases denied and be sent right back to where they came from. It was like we had been given a cosmic gut punch that hung over us the whole way back to the hotel. It was a disgusting feeling to sit in my hotel suite on the foot of the bed covered in clean, fluffy, white sheets cable TV at my fingertips. I could not help thinking that those people who we had met and had gotten to know deeply, who had spent 2 weeks on a bus with little to no food or water, who were greeted upon their arrival in the US by being detained with 40 other people in a jail cell only meant for 20, with only one open toilet in the center of the cell. They had undergone so much sacrifice to finally get a taste of freedom that would ultimately be denied and taken away from them. The faith that we profess every Sunday when we gather together in sacred community is born out of the universalist idea that we cannot have true salvation unless all others have the same chance to attain that salvation, and that anything less than that cannot be considered true salvation at all. The sixth of our 7 UU principles speaks of the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. What became clear to all of us through our experiences along the border is that there are plenty of individuals for whom peace, liberty, and justice is nowhere close to being a possibility, let alone a reality. To turn a blind eye to these types of injustices is to forego everything that we lift up as UUs. It is especially insidious to do so considering the positions of privilege that we occupy, whether or not we chose them. To quote the words of Dylan Corbett, executive director of the Hope Borderlands Institute and a local community activist in El Paso, we must be attentive to the borders in our own community, both physical and those embedded within our ways of thinking, that prevent us from creating the true sense of world community and wholeness that we look to foster within the spaces that we inhabit. If we are to truly answer the question of what it means to be a people of wholeness, it begins by trying to create and foster a sense of belonging for those who seek to join us in greater community. This is done the same way it is for any newcomer who walks through the front door at Westside on Sunday morning. We welcome them and invite them to enter, rejoice, and come in. Not as who we want and expect them to be, but as the unique individual that they are. The same is and should be true for all those who come to our borders seeking to find something more and something better. We are taught as children in elementary school that the poem inscribed on the Statue of Liberty, the New Colossus, begins with the lines, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." There was a time when we encouraged those tired, poor, huddled individuals to come to this country to find the promise of freedom that those escaping religious persecution in England had been able to find. Now, we take those same tired, poor, huddled individuals, and our welcome to them is to separate them from their families and children and to detain them for an indefinite period of time, only to cast them back to where they came from. May we commit ourselves to be a people who actually live into the same values that this country was founded upon, the same ideas of humanity, liberty, and egalitarianism that we as UUs have preached from our pulpits for hundreds of years. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste.